George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We are talking with A.R. Bernard. He is the senior pastor of the Christian Cultural Center out of Brooklyn, New York. He's an author, a renowned speaker. The resume is too long to repeat here, but we do know that he is the pastor mentor of John Carter, senior pastor of the Abundant Life Christian Center here in Syracuse. And so we caught up with A.R. Bernard, and we dip into the vault, just so you know, we dip into the vault, and we caught up with A.R. Bernard as he was giving a talk and presentation for his book at the time, The 4 Things Women Want from a Man. And we joined the conversation where he talks about how he knew what his purpose was related to the founding of this ministry.
I didn't know. I didn't have the words to articulate it the way I can today. I was trying to be obedient to what I perceived as a divine vocation. And, you know, I was like right next to 17, trying to grow, trying to find my way, you know, and understand what was going on, where this was all leading. I really didn't know. It was a journey of faith, you know, and over time, it began to come together and make sense. I knew specifically, you know, what it was to pastor a church and all those things. But in terms of what this meant out into the future, it was a journey.
So for people who are sitting in this room tonight who may be thinking that something else is calling them, how do you recommend people discover their purpose, pursue it? Should everybody just quit what they're doing now and do what you did? So how do you know, and how do you recommend people find and discover their purpose?
First, purpose is not decided by you. It's decided by God.
Okay.
It's something that's discovered by you. Where we can begin is identifying our gift, talents, and ability. Because what God's called you to do, He's designed you to do. He's gifted you to do. And what He's gifted you to do and designed you to do, He's called you to do. So, you know, purpose and design are important. So once you identify your gifts, your talents, your abilities, that's a great place to begin. And the question is, purpose is now, how is that applied? In what context? And that's why I was doing an interview with Oprah Winfrey, right, on her Super Soul Sunday, and she asked me about that question. And I said to her, purpose is not static, it's dynamic. Because if it's static in the sense that if you come to the conclusion that this one thing is the purpose and you achieve it at age 30, then you have no reason to exist. There's no purpose for the rest of your life. So purpose changes only in the sense of how your gift, talents, abilities are applied. We live life on levels, we arrive in stages, and as we move from one level and stage to another in life, how we apply those gifts and talents and abilities may change, the role we play, the office. Because essentially, like Aristotle said, where your gift, talents, and abilities, at that intersection where your gift, talents, and abilities meet a human need, therein you discover purpose. And that's constantly discovered along the journey of life. So I think that's important to know. Because people are wondering, you know, what's that one thing I'm here to do? And it's really not like that.
But it also sounds like I hear you saying, but you also have to be an open vessel. You have to listen and hear. You said it's not decided by you. God was already giving that to you. So how do you have to listen? It sounds like you're...
Absolutely.
I mean, you're implying that. You have to listen.
Yeah.
Give yourself some time and spend some time in contemplation so you can know.
Yeah, I mean, even more today, the interior life is critical to success, whether in a religious context, in the context of doing life, doing business, no matter what it is. And the interior life and the development of the interior life develops your ability to hear. You know, because most of the answers are within us. They're not external, they're internal. But we don't listen. We're not trained to hear. And truth emanates from within. You know, there may be external influences that guide us to it or trigger it, but it has to be something that's birthed from within the individual. And when I say birthed in connection to that truth that's absolute. It comes into the human context through the human heart. And that requires us to pay attention and to be reflective, to be introspective.
So today is about legacy. Let's talk about what your proudest accomplishment is.
Gosh, that's a lot. Having something to pass on to my children, to pass on to those who have followed my example in Christ, not just my congregation, but social media, radio, television, wherever. Having something to pass on, something that's of quality, that's going to make a difference in people's lives. I think that's the greatest joy that I have. I've been corporately in a 20-year succession plan. We're 18 years into a 20-year succession plan with my son. It started back in 2000. And succession is where legacy and destiny meet. And that's important. It's not just legacy. It's where legacy and destiny meet, because the person who's being succeeded thinks about legacy, but the person who is the successor thinks about destiny. So you're talking about the past and the future coming together, reconciling, and then projecting out into the future. And that's important, to understand that. That's kind of where I am. So I hope I've passed on, most importantly, a set of values that come from a set of principles that have been internalized by my family and my congregants.
Who has a question? In terms of upstate New York, you've been involved in several projects and have served as an agent of change. Can you speak to your experience in this community specifically for us?
I think the word collaboration is because it's going to take collaboration of private sector, government, and faith-based organizations and community-based organizations in order to respond to the needs. We have to shed the need for one messianic figure and realize that we have to gather all that's going on the ground and work collectively. You are now stepping into one of the major reasons that I'm a Christian, not just the theology of Christianity, but the Christian social ethic. And within the Christian social ethic is the term subsidiarity, which simply means that we believe that social and political issues are best resolved on the ground, locally, where the situations are taking place, where there's a greater knowledge and understanding of what's happening, along with help from central organizations like government or other major corporations and whatnot. So subsidiarity is critical because it demands a collaboration, but an appreciation for the view of those who are closest to the situations, whether they be poverty issues, inequities in education, economic inequities as well. But again, that comes out of a Christian social ethic. And it's going to take collaboration. Right now, we are preparing for a press conference in about 3 weeks, where we in Brooklyn, we're doing a $1.2 billion project, which is 2,100 units of mixed income, residential, retail, commercial, educational building, performing arts center on 10.5 acres. And it's a collaboration between our organization, our Community Development Corporation, government agencies, and private sector, and community-based organizations, creating what we call an urban village. Understanding the need to create community and not just warehouse people, which has been the experience for the last 7 decades in America. And all it has done is perpetuate poverty and perpetuate inner city conditions. We have to think differently. I'm a big fan of someone named Jane Jacobs, and Jane Jacobs had a very specific view of what we call the inner city. and how to address those conditions, how she saw it. And you can only do it by creating community. And community means that people have access to amenities within 1,000-foot walking distance. Mm-hmm. It means that the sidewalks are active and there are stakeholders such as business holders, community organizations involved. And I will tell you, when you understand community in such a way, police presence plays less of an element in securing safety and order within that community. You have so many stakeholders on the ground, all right, that it's difficult for elements of crime and disruption and undermining of the quality of life to come in. And that's how we have to think, I believe, going out into the future. So we're trying to create a model that can be replicated in other cities around the country. I've sat with the new mayor of Atlanta, and interesting what's happening in Atlanta. There is a gentrification taking place. The gentrification is taking place all over major cities, especially in New York, Brooklyn. You know, who would have thought that Brooklyn would be among the expensive places to live? You know, go figure. But the gentrification in Brooklyn and New York City is more economic than racial. But in Atlanta, it's racial, because more whites are moving into Atlanta proper. And blacks who live there, and persons of color who live there, are now leaving because they can't afford to live there. But they are moving to the suburbs, which is creating a crisis. Because when you have tens of thousands of persons of color from the city moving into the suburbs, the infrastructure in the suburbs cannot handle such a rapid influx of people. So now inner city conditions are being created in the suburbs. I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight, because in the 60s, inner city was a condition that was primarily geographical. It was in urban context. But inner city today is not confined to urban. It is suburban, it is rural. And it is still the same condition of impoverished communities, low income, high crime, underserved communities. But it is a condition that has metastasized in American society. And the interesting thing is, persons of color only make up 23% of the inner city problem. It's predominantly a rural white problem. But there's a distinction in how whites experience poverty and how persons of color experience poverty. Because within the rural white community that is experiencing this new inner city phenomena, all right, they tend to have intact family structure, two-parent families, etc. So how poverty is experienced differs, which says regardless of the only 23%, the issue is greater because of how it's experienced.
What's your affiliation with the Trump administration?
Some of what I'm sharing with you came out of a responsibility that I was given with Dr. Ben Carson, to come up with an inner city initiative. So I was asked to come up with an agenda and a proposed initiative that the administration could use as talking points. So I went back and I studied the last 100 years, going back to the early 1900s, 1907, the founding of NAACP, 1917, right up to the early 1920s. And you had three major voices of influence coming from the communities of color who really set in motion the three approaches to poverty, disenfranchisement, marginalization of communities of color. I don't want to give my whole speech away tonight.
Oh, that.
But, and I came up with talking points. Dr. Carson was going to do a tour around the country and talk about these things, and we were going to work on addressing it. And there needs to be a re-education of the American public about inner city as I shared with you, it's no longer urban. It's a condition that is suburban, rural. In the year 2000, 26% of America was rural. 2012, 13%. So we're experiencing what Alvin Toffler wrote of in 1984 in his book Future Shock.
Right.
We're experiencing the rapid breakdown of traditions, social norms, social values that once were the constitution of a society. The result is rootlessness and urbanization. And we're seeing it play out right before us here in the 21st century.
Any other questions?
I have a question about life cycle.
What are the 4 things that women want?
Let me say this to you. I feel like the answer man sitting here. I'm sometimes a teacher, but always a student. And that's the way I live my life. I never feel that I've arrived. I'm open to learn, to grow. I believe that we never stop growing to the day we die in this particular life and human condition, that it's always about learning. You know, there's a wonderful statement John Maxwell makes. He says to the effect that you win some and you learn some. You only lose when you don't learn. And that's so true about life. And so I'm growing and learning. And when I finished the manuscript for 4 Things Women Want from a Man, I handed it to my wife, and she read it. She got back to me. She says, "You've been listening to me." And I said, "Absolutely." And then she reminded me that she wasn't finished with me. So that's book 1.
Okay.
But decisiveness, maturity, decisiveness, consistency, and strength. And it wasn't just stating those things. It was interviews with women and asking them and having conversations around those 4 things that they all, at the end of the conversation, said, "You know what? I've never had it summed up in 4 elements like that, but you're right. These are the things that we look for." And, you know, maturity doesn't come with age. It begins with the acceptance of responsibility for our words, thoughts, motives, actions, attitudes. And it means being open to change, which is the only constant in life. And truth, that's why I said love and truth is what the human heart was designed for. Mm-hmm. Truth brings a conviction necessary for change, and all truth is confrontational. And too often we don't want to be confronted with the truth because it demands that we take responsibility for our words, our thoughts, our motives, our actions, and our attitudes. But when we are willing to take that responsibility, then authentic change begins to take place within who we are and everything that we're associated with.
So maturity,
decisiveness,
consistency.
It's a woman's prerogative
and
to change
strength.
her mind, not a man's.
When with that,
I don't know who, that wasn't Bible. I found that.
Well, well, let's give it up for Dr. A.R. Bernard. And don't forget, his book is called The 4 Things Women Want from a Man. He is the pastor of the Christian Cultural Center out of Brooklyn, New York, and the mentor pastor to John Carter, who is the senior pastor of the Abundant Life Christian Center. Inspiration for the nation.